Next Tuesday, the feature film of Dad's Army with the regular members of the Warmington-on-Sea Home Guard, Arthur Lowe, John Le Mesurier and Clive Dunn. The Tuesday film at 7:15 next week.
Tomorrow night, BBC1 presents the Royal Tournament. For over 100 years, this great military showpiece has provided a unique pageant of music, skill and courage. Among the highlights of this memorable annual occasion are the Royal Navy Field Gun Competition, the musical drive by the King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery, and the massed bands of the Royal Marines. Raymond Baxter describes the action and the splendour of the Royal Tournament, tomorrow at 7 o'clock on BBC1.
There's Rhythm on 2 now, featuring the distinctive vocal style of the new Swingle Singers. On BBC1 at 9:25, Rescue Flight with Glyn Westnip and the famous 771 Search and Rescue Squadron at Caldrose. First now, the 9 o'clock news.
The Middle East crisis, Prime Minister Begin tells the Americans he's ready to give peace a chance. And news just come in of an international snub over the royal wedding. The King and Queen of Spain will not be attending it because Gibraltar has been chosen to start the honeymoon on the Royal Yacht Britannia. Here's Christopher Wayne.
The row is over the government decision that Prince Charles and Lady Diana will begin the second part of their honeymoon from Gibraltar, a British colony which has long been claimed by Spain. The decision has outraged the Spanish government, and today they were in communication with the Foreign Office about the plan. It's not clear whether this took the form of a formal protest or whether it was at a more informal level. The one thing which was clear that was, having announced the plan, there could be no question by Britain of its subsequent revision. The decision will delight Gibraltarians, who will see in this public intergovernmental fracas a reassertion of the British government's policy of standing firmly behind the wishes of the people of Gibraltar to remain firmly tied to Great Britain. But it has cooled relations with Spain, and the decision of King Juan Carlos to call off his visit to the wedding was probably the least possible reaction in the circumstances. It remains to be seen whether the Spanish government intend to take things any further. But it's not easy for them to do so. Britain is currently chairman of the EEC, and Spain is trying to become a member. And there's also the question of NATO, for whom Gibraltar is a key base. The most surprising thing about this row is that it's happened at all. The Foreign Office must have known that Gibraltar is an emotive issue with the Spanish people, and they must have expected a quick reaction. So presumably they knew this was going to happen.
And now tonight's news from the Middle East. Mr. Begin and the Israeli cabinet have given a cautious go-ahead to the American efforts to bring about a ceasefire in Lebanon. They say they'll cooperate with Mr. Philip Habib's American peace mission, but with two important conditions. They won't negotiate with Palestinian guerrillas directly or indirectly, and they reserve the right to continue acting against the Palestinians if they fire rockets from southern Lebanon into Israel. The cabinet meeting followed yesterday's decision by President Reagan to suspend delivery to Israel of 10 F-16 planes. The cabinet's decision remained a closely guarded secret until Mr. Begin had had a 90-minute meeting with Mr. Habib. Both men refused to answer journalists' questions, but Mr. Habib said he would now proceed with his mission as drafted by President Reagan to bring about a ceasefire on the Israeli-Lebanese border.
Once again, the absolute intransigence of Israeli Prime Minister Begin is being demonstrated. He will, even with the threat of war looming, do nothing that might appear to recognize the Palestine Liberation Organization. And so Mr. Habib, President Reagan's long-suffering peace envoy, is expected to fly to Beirut tomorrow with an almost impossible brief: to negotiate with the Lebanese government that has no control whatsoever over the Palestinians on its territory. If it sounds complicated, that's because it is. But Mr. Habib obviously feels it's worth making the effort. He may have taken heart from the fact that there is mounting criticism of Mr. Begin within Israel, and even within his own cabinet. And the Israeli Prime Minister was, I understand, shaken by President Reagan's decision to withhold delivery of the F-16 aircraft. Mr. Begin had not expected the American president would risk the wrath of the powerful Jewish lobby in Washington by doing that. The F-16s are not vital to Israel's defense in the immediate future. Rather is it the fact that the United States has actually refused to deliver them which has shaken the Israelis. Even as the by now familiar routine of trying to stop the Middle East collapsing into all-out war was being gone through, the two sides were still at it. The Palestinians kept up a steady barrage of shells and rockets into northern Israel, homing in particularly on the seaside town of Nahariya, which is now almost deserted. The Israelis replied with airstrikes and with an estimated 600 artillery shells aimed at Palestinian camps where they say PLO military units mingle with the civilians. The United Nations observer said dozens of Palestinian communities had been devastated by the bombardment. To us, he said it looks like a softening up before something even bigger. If the two sides do find themselves in a full-scale war situation, Israel, on paper at least, has a clear advantage, being able to put in a general mobilization well over 500,000 people into the field against the PLO's 20,000. The Israelis have some of the finest armoured units in the world, including those equipped with their own Merkava tanks. The PLO have a few dozen ancient Russian tanks. Israel has a fleet of Reshef gunboats, again built locally, and these have already been used with effect to bombard the Lebanese coastal strip. The PLO has no navy. But Israel's air force is the greatest military asset. The Kafir is Israeli built. French Mirages and American Phantoms, as well as F-16s, make it one of the most efficient air forces in the world. The PLO has no air force. What it has is 20,000 relatively inexperienced young men with light weapons, but with a burning hatred of Israel drilled into them from the cradle. They've proved in the past with their terrorist raids into Israel that they're quite prepared to die for it. They make up, one Western diplomat once said, the biggest suicide squad in the world. That, though, is only on paper. For an all-out battle between the Israelis and the PLO is unlikely to stop at that. Already the oil-rich Gulf states and even Egypt, now officially at peace with Israel, are coming to the PLO's aid after the Beirut bombing, where, incidentally, it's now known that 91 people died and 457 were injured, the majority Lebanese, not Palestinian. In that event, Israel would find herself overwhelmingly outnumbered, and without a guarantee of American support, it's questionable what the outcome would be. And that might be the best hope there is tonight for the Middle East once again to claw its way back from the brink. Certain the Americans, upon whom the burden of finding some sort of peace formula falls, see reason for some hope tonight, as Martin Bell reports from the summit of Western leaders in Ottawa.
Americans are encouraged by the news from Israel, though by no means overconfident about it. They know negotiations could still fall apart in Beirut, but as they see it, Mr. Habib has succeeded yet again in buying time in a crisis which, according to Mrs. Thatcher, has overshadowed the summit here. The summit itself, however, she said, had been very valuable. The leaders think it's been a successful summit, and they left Montebello this afternoon for a final session in Ottawa, after which they would give their versions of why they thought it had been a success. Behind them, they'd had discussions about interest rates and inflation, ways of helping the world's poorer nations, and this morning, the cutting back of high-technology exports to the Soviet Union. Ahead of them lay any last-minute changes in the final communique, and they'd almost certainly be deciding to continue these summit meetings. With the Ottawa summit, the first series ends. All 7 countries will have played host to such a meeting, and next year it'll be the turn of the French to receive the others. And this is the time for the 7 to decide if the summits are worth going on with. Apparently, they believe that they are. There's a lot of socializing, as at the lunchtime reception today at Government House in Ottawa. But this summit has been more than the getting-to-know-you occasion the Americans billed it as. It's an opportunity for easy access by heads of government to each other. And on the economic side, this has given the Europeans a chance to complain to the Americans about the effects of their high interest rates. The French and Germans have been particularly outspoken, and the Canadian reaction is, welcome to the club. We've suffered from this for years.
I was a witness to some very frank exchanges on the subject of high and volatile interest rates. If one were to draw a conclusion, it would be that the Americans have been sensitized to the effect of their policies on their partners.
When the fanfares were over, what the national leaders got out of this was a compromise over their concerns. So the Europeans made a commitment to stronger defences and the Americans to talks on arms control. In Mrs. Thatcher's words, on the day the summit came to Ottawa, they knew each other's minds better. The next step, when all this is over, is for the national leaders to convince the voters that the journey was somehow worthwhile. Martin Bell, BBC, Ottawa.
One of those economic problems taxing the Big Seven is rising unemployment, and nowhere more so than in Britain. The latest figures announced today show another big increase, though they didn't, as some had feared, reach the 3 million mark. The July total out of work was over 2,851,000, a figure slightly inflated by delayed returns in the civil servants' dispute, but still an increase of 170,000 in a month. And the number of school leavers unable to get a job rose sharply to over 284,000. The Labour leader, Mr Michael Foot, described the increases as terrible and called for a vote of no confidence in the government.
Well, today's figures are grisly enough. An extra 170,000 out of work, 69,000 of them school leavers. But there are signs now that the rise in unemployment is at least slowing down. There's usually a big jump in July, and today's figures are only about 30,000 more than might be expected. At the same time, there's been a reduction in short-time working and a very small increase for the time of year in the number of vacancies. As for school leavers, well, actually less have signed on this year than did this time last year. That's a bit puzzling. It may be because they aren't eligible to draw supplementary benefit until the autumn. As for the future, well, unemployment normally rises slightly next month and then falls away in the autumn as school leavers find at least some jobs. So it may be December or even January until that dreadful figure of 3 million is reached.
Pay talks between the British Rail Board and the rail unions have come close to breakdown over the implementation of last week's arbitration award. The board, faced with a worsening financial position, told the unions it would pay the recommended 8% backdated to April, but couldn't afford the further 3% from next month unless it was financed by detailed productivity improvements. The talks were adjourned until Thursday for both sides to think again, with the unions accusing the board of undermining the credibility of the arbitration tribunal.
The tribunal looked at the finances of the board. An independent arbitrator, 3 of them, not unskilled in business management and labour relations, and unanimously said this is the way forward. Now, I've accepted it. I don't like it. It's a third of what I thought was sensible and reasonable. But in the spirit of trying to solve our problems, I picked it up. I found the party lacking was the board. And I've said, will you go and think again? And by Thursday, I hope he changes his mind.
I think it's important that we recognise the status of the arbitration. This is an advisory award, quite clearly within our machinery. Normally, of course, we all try to accept the advice of the arbitrator because that's the whole object of going there. But at the same time, we have to recognise that at the end of the day, the responsibility rests with us. And it's no point in the British Railways Board, or the trade unions for that matter, in agreeing to something which they cannot deliver.
It's virtually certain that Mrs Shirley Williams, the Social Democrat, will not be fighting the Croydon North West by-election, although she originally had the backing of the Liberal leader, Mr David Steele. He now accepts that the Liberals in the constituency wish to stand by the man who's fought the seat 3 times. The Social Democrats in Croydon are meeting tonight to decide whether to throw their support behind him, as the Liberals backed Mr Jenkins in Warrington. On the heart-searching within the party alliance, our political editor, John Simpson.
If the suggested guidelines, roughed out already between the Liberals and the Social Democrats about who shall fight which constituency, were actually in force now, Croydon North West would almost certainly be earmarked for the Social Democrats, and Mrs Shirley Williams would be the agreed candidate of the alliance there. But the guidelines aren't in force now. They'll probably be agreed at the Liberals' Assembly in September, a month or so before the by-election takes place. In the meantime, the feeling within the Liberal Party has built up strongly that after Warrington, it's their turn to fight a by-election next, and Mr Steele has had to accept the force of it.
There was certainly some of that feeling. I think it's wrong. I believe that this alliance has got to work very much as a joint effort in which we take the main opportunity as it arises. And I think there was no doubt that the opinion poll showed that Shirley Williams would be in starting as the winner. I'm quite sure that we will also end up winning this seat, but it's going to be much harder.
You've really got to win it, though, haven't you? Otherwise you'll be in quite some trouble.
I think we have got to win it, yes.
So it'll be Mr Bill Pitt of the Liberals who steps out for the alliance in Croydon North West, assuming, that is, that the local Social Democrats give him their backing this evening. He's regarded by his colleagues as a good average candidate, and his 3 defeats in the constituency aren't blamed on him. The business of choosing a joint candidate for Croydon North West has been messy and difficult, Next time, both sides say things will be better. Mrs. Shirley Williams was hoping for a winnable seat this time, and she hasn't got it.
Now to the test match they're already calling one of the greatest ever. England achieved the almost impossible by turning what looked like certain defeat into a victory, which has earned them a place in cricketing history. When the Australian second innings began this morning at Headingley, they only had to make 130 runs to be 2 up in the series. But they were up against Bob Willis bowling at his devastating best. Michael Blakey reports on a remarkable day's cricket.
Botham was given the new ball to see if he could add to his 199 runs and his 6 first innings wickets. Wood gone for 10, but Australia were still clear favourites. As Willis began his best ever bowling spell, Australia only wanted 74 to win with 9 wickets left. Chappell out and 2 down, but plenty of time to get the runs. And that brought Kim Hughes to the crease, but Botham still hadn't finished his great all-round performance. This time there was no mistake in the slips. Botham's catch dismissed Hughes for a duck. Willis picked up his 3rd wicket off 11 balls before lunch. Australia must have spent lunch thinking their last 6 batsmen could score 72 runs. But if they did, they reckon without the fighting spirit of Bob Willis. And that was the end of Dyson, the century maker in the first innings. In that first innings, England had dropped some easy catches, but today it all came right. Dilley was under tremendous pressure as the ball soared above his head. Marsh gone and a 5th wicket for Willis. By now the bookmakers had offered 500 to 1 against England must have been sweating. Lilly had scored a valuable 17. The odds looked to be against Gatting making the catch. So the last man in and 19 to win. Willis 8 for 43. England had won by 18 runs after having to follow on. All good stuff for the record books, but it was the manner of the victory that counted today. The crowd had seen history made for half-price entrance. A man of the match in Botham, after all the problems of the last 12 months, must have savoured every moment of the famous victory. So the team were happy and the crowd were happy. But it was nothing compared with the supporter who walked into the bookmakers' tent at Headingley on Saturday when all seemed lost for England.
How much have you just collected?
£2.5 grand.
£2,500?
Yeah.
So you put how much on when?
A fiver at 500 to 1.
Well, they're not so delighted in Australia. In fact, they can't believe it. It's been reported in the Australian press in terms of shock and astonishment. The Melbourne Sun called it a disaster. And if you want to see extended highlights of the game, BBC1 tonight at 10:15. While Australia laments its lost test, neighbouring New Zealand has sporting problems of a wholly different kind. The controversial South African rugby tour of New Zealand has now led to Commonwealth government switching September's finance ministers' meeting from Auckland to the Bahamas. The move wasn't unexpected, but the commissioners said they'd taken the decision with regret. New Zealand's Prime Minister, Mr Muldoon, commented briefly that he was profoundly disappointed and would not attend the rescheduled conference. Away from Auckland, the Springboks met more trouble from anti-apartheid demonstrators just before their first tour game in Gisborne. There, as Jim Biddulph reports, the rugby pitch was the target.
Suddenly, this afternoon, with the match less than 24 hours away, a truck burst onto the Gisborne rugby ground. It raced round, tearing up the turf. Broken glass was scattered, although some of them failed to burst. It was exactly the kind of incident that the massive police reinforcements brought in here had hoped to prevent. The demonstrators, 3 women and a man, were caught and pulled out of the van and arrested. It was then up to the local officials to try to collect the broken glass in time for the match to go ahead.
It had to be done. The police wouldn't allow peaceful protests, so it had to be done.
This was the most serious anti-tour demonstration yet. But the Springboks have been met by demonstrators almost everywhere they go, by night as well as day, and usually by hostile ones. But when they went to a Maori ceremony, there were more friendly faces than hostile ones. Even this little ceremony was really a welcome, the team was assured. However, they were warned there'd be no more welcomes unless South Africa changed. Ceremonial turned to celebration, with Tobias, the only non-white member of the team, the centre of attraction. The whole evening became an emotional release for the South Africans, the first break since they got here. The 53% of New Zealanders against the tour were obviously not represented. But then it was back to training to shed the last of the jet lag. The police were on hand, and so on the fence were the kids. Jim Bidoff, BBC, New Zealand.
9 black states concerned about trade with South Africa have been holding a summit in Salisbury, Zimbabwe, to review progress in the first year of their economic alliance. As Philip Haypen now reports, one of the chief aims of the Southern African Development Coordination Conference, the SADCC, is to loosen its members' economic dependence on South Africa.
They came from all over southern Africa for the Salisbury summit. Zambia's President Kaunda desperately wants to stop trading with South Africa. But his country, like so many others, has been queuing up to buy food and other essentials from the neighbour it hates. Zimbabwe's Prime Minister, Robert Mugabe, knows the problem only too well. 90% of his country's trade passes through South Africa because of Rhodesia's traditional links with its neighbour. As Zimbabwe's post-independence euphoria evaporates, the nation is facing up to its many challenges, including its struggle to break South Africa's economic stranglehold, and it's very much a David and Goliath tussle. All of the countries at the conference trade with South Africa. According to the South Africans, their trade with Black Africa was worth £750 million last year. The South African government approves because of the political leverage it gives them over their customers. In turn, the countries at this summit of the SADCC accuse South Africa of trying to manipulate them and preparing for war.
Though SADC states are pursuing the policy of peaceful coexistence in this region, South Africa has assumed a warlike posture towards our neighbors. The consequences of this aggressive posture are obviously detrimental to our peace-loving states.
As the delegates met to discuss ways of loosening South Africa's economic grip, yet another South African Airways plane landed at Salisbury, one of 10 black African cities the airline flies to, despite a trade embargo by the Organization of African Unity. On the railways, there are daily services to South Africa. Nearly all of Zimbabwe's fuel comes through South Africa, and recent problems along the line have led to rationing of diesel fuel. It won't be easy for Black Africa to sever its South African connection, and for its part, the Pretoria government is unlikely to let the trade run down on terms unfavourable to it. But despite all these problems, the nations at this summit are determined to press ahead. As Mr. Mugabe put it, our political freedom is meaningless without our economic liberation. Philip Hayton, BBC, Salisbury.
Finally, one of the great landmarks of Britain, the Eddystone Lighthouse, is losing its keepers, ending a tradition going back nearly 300 years. Automation is taking over. Until the new remote equipment is ready, a lightship will do the job. John Walmsley reports.
The treacherous reef around the Eddystone, once called the place of the reeling waves, was a graveyard of ships before the first lighthouse was built nearly 3 centuries ago. The present lighthouse has stood for 100 years, lighting the way for seamen. Apart from times of war, its lantern has shone continuously, a warning of the danger beneath. Today, the light went out, and the lighthouse keepers have left for the last time. Next year, it will be computers and microprocessors, and not men, which have to endure the cramped conditions and the battering of winter seas. Over the next 12 months, the lantern room will be fully automated. After that, the only visitors to the rock, apart from seagulls, will be engineers making inspection visits, ensuring that the 570,000 candle power light can be seen 18 miles away. While the work is carried out, Trinity House will station a lightship near the reef, making sure that the Eddystone doesn't claim any more seamen's lives.
And now the main news again. The King and Queen of Spain say they'll not be coming to the royal wedding next week. It's over the announcement that Prince Charles and Lady Diana would be starting their honeymoon cruise in Britannia from Gibraltar. Tonight, a Spanish Foreign Ministry spokesman said the decision of Prince Charles and Lady Diana to visit Gibraltar was, as he put it, inopportune, gratuitous and mistaken. He confirmed that King Juan Carlos's decision was made both by the Spanish government and the Spanish royal family. Buckingham Palace would only say tonight they could confirm the King and Queen of Spain would not be at the wedding. That's all from us. Good night.
Good evening to you. The weather's taking a decided turn for the worse again. In fact, we have an area of low pressure at the moment developing close to Northern Ireland, and that's going to run across the country during the course of the night, producing a fair amount of rain as it does so, and then eventually pulling down colder northerly winds, which tomorrow will bring in a mixture of sunshine and showers to northern and western areas. In fact, if we look at the satellite photograph, you can see that area of low pressure developing, or at least you can see that there's a lot of cloud now over the country, and some of it producing some fairly heavy rain. Further south, in central and southern parts of England, apart from the odd shower, it is dry at the moment, but even here, later on in the night, there will be some rain spreading down from the northwest. So if we look now at tomorrow, and really we've got a good part of the country with a fairly wet day in store. That's the southeast of Scotland, central and eastern parts of England, a cold, quite cloudy day with rain from time to time, and some of that rain rather on the heavy side, and as I say, a much colder day than of late. 16 centigrade is only 61 Fahrenheit. For the bulk of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and perhaps some of these far western parts of England and Wales, it'll be slightly brighter. One or two places will have some sunny intervals, especially in Scotland and Northern Ireland, but equally there will be a fair number of showers around, and some of them on the heavy side. That's it. Very good evening to you.
The Royal Wedding. And traditionally, the BBC has always brought these occasions of pomp and majesty into the homes of the nation. The coronation in 1953 was the first time television cameras had been allowed into Westminster Abbey. In 1969, the BBC's new colour cameras covered a unique outside broadcast, the investiture of the Prince of Wales at Carnarvon. 1973 saw the wedding of Princess Anne, and BBC cameras recorded the happiness of the newly married couple. And 1977 was the Queen's Silver Jubilee year. A surge of public affection greeted the sovereign. And in July last year, the nation paid tribute to the Queen Mother on the occasion of her 80th birthday. On July the 29th, the BBC will once again use its unrivaled expertise to televise the Royal Wedding.
On 2 shortly, another fictional episode centred on the psychiatric ward at Maybury, where the staff respond to a cry for help from a couple who feel unable to venture outside their home. On BBC1 at 10:15, Sports Special, which includes highlights of the final day and the third test at Headingley, as well as coverage of the Royal International Horse Show. Sports Special in 50 minutes. Now, Rescue Flight with Glyn Worsnip, the first reporter ever to live and fly with the search and rescue helicopter crews of 771 Squadron.
Go!